Good evening, my children. It's time to get spooky.
What manicure is this gonna be?
This is a Halloween manicure. Spooky. Today, I'm going to do Halloween nail art. That's what we're using. I wanted to make a Halloween nail art tutorial because I was seeing a bunch of comments asking for Halloween nail art. So I'm gonna do 5 designs, 1 on each finger, of increasing difficulty, but still overall pretty beginner-friendly nail art. It's gonna glow in the dark, with the option for it to glow in the dark. Whee!
It's gonna be so unhinged.
This is gonna be so hard to edit. As a homosexual, Halloween is my favorite holiday. There's a reason why it's called Gay Christmas. Spooky. Halloween was always really special to me because of my mother. She would go trick-or-treating with us all the time, literally even into college. I also went trick-or-treating with some friends in college to continue the tradition, and I remember going around the dorm and knocking on random doors and saying trick-or-treat, people being like, here. And by the end of the night, we had 2 packets of ramen and a tin of used chewing tobacco. So, pretty successful haul. Hull. There's a U. Why do you not pronounce the U in Hull?
You're saying Hull, H-U-L-L. Mayhem!
Mayhem's gonna haunt me forever.
It's mayhem all over again.
So I wanted to do classic Halloween symbolism. Think pumpkins, think spiders. Wait, no, I'm not doing a pumpkin. Think ghosts, think spiders. So, let's get into it. Before we begin, I wanted to point out that like 90% of my watch time comes from people who aren't subscribed, and since I pointed it out at the start of the last video and it's 87% now, I think it's working. So please subscribe if you're not already. Anyways, onto the nail art. For the first nail art, I wanted to do a spider web, and so I started with Ivory Tower by Holo Taco, and I was clearly a little too impatient before I started painting, and you can see that I was pulling up a little of the peel-off base coat during that first coat. It took 2 coats to build it to opacity. And you might have noticed it already, but I am doing all of the nails at the exact same time. I'm just gonna show it one at a time so you can focus on the process in case you wanna try it for yourself. And as I whispered earlier, I did want this to glow in the dark, so it was followed up by a glow in the dark top coat. And all of the nail art that I'm doing today, I did over 1 more regular glossy top coat just for added protection, and if I messed anything up, I could try to fix it a little bit easier instead of smudging the polish that was underneath. And before I get into the actual nail art, I wanted to show just some of the tools and things that I use in order to do it. I have a silicone mat that I can put some nail polish on, and then I can go with a thin striping brush, pull it through that little blob of polish that I did, and also rotate the brush while I'm doing that such that it makes a super sharp tip of paint. And now the real nail art begins. I started by picking a corner of the nail to center the spider web and pulled straight lines down using that thin striping brush. You have to go pretty slowly and pretty carefully to make sure that the lines have a roughly uniform thickness, and I rotated my hand however I needed to so that way I can pull the line as comfortably as possible, because you want to try to do this in one clean motion in order for the lines to look as sharp as possible. That said, if you ever have to go back and make any adjustments, you can, but be really careful because black polish is really unforgiving. And in order to make the classic spiderweb shape, you want to make these C shapes that connect the lines you made earlier. Initially, I started by using the thin striping brush and realized that I was having a difficult time with the control, so I shifted to a detail brush. Now those C shapes should be hanging inwards where the curve points towards the center of the spiderweb to make that spiderweb shape. And after some finishing touches and tweaking the lines a little bit, the spiderweb nail was done. And next up is the bloody stone nail, which I actually have done before, I think about 2 years ago before I was posting anywhere, and so I wanted to do it again because it's really, really cool, and it's actually really easy to do. More on that later. So to begin, I started with Gift Receipt by Holo Taco, which may seem weird that I began with a frosted metal in order to make a stone texture, but you'll see, once I add some of the other layers, it changes the underlayer to make it this really rough and almost matte looking texture. I did 2 coats to get to opacity, and then I added a black Flake Taco in order to just make it look a little bit rougher and a little bit more textured. And because I wanted the whole set to glow, I did glow in the dark taco, which you can see changes the texture of it. It almost pulls it a little bit more yellow in just a totally different direction. And we're gonna all collectively ignore the fact that I dropped a giant glob on my finger while I was doing the top coat before I was going to do the nail art. To make the blood drips, I used Devil's Advocate by Holo Taco because they literally market it as an ox blood Crelly polish. I started by putting a little bit of the blood near my cuticle line, Frankenstein, and then I grabbed a big glob of the polish on my tiny little nail art brush and placed it about halfway down the nail and then slowly pulled it up towards the end of the nail. This way it was thicker at the bottom and thinner on its way up in order to make it look like the blood actually dripped down from my cuticle. And in order to avoid it looking like I have a horizontal red line and 3 vertical red lines, I rounded the top of the vertical lines in order to make it look like gravity pulled the blood drip downwards. And here's the finished blood drip nail art. And next up is the patchwork nail art inspired by Frankenstein or Sally from Nightmare Before Christmas. I started by doing 2 coats of cold slate by Holo Taco to get it to full opacity. And next up I used 2 colors that I thought would complement the cool gray base well. I used Here For The Payday and Too Good To Be Blue, both by Holo Taco, initially going in with just the brush to make these blobs. Then I went in with my nail art brush and I tried to square off the blobs because those were going to become my patches. And like before, I did a coat of glow-in-the-dark top coat followed by regular glossy top coat for protection. And then to make the patches actually patches, I went in with my black polish and my tiny little nail art brush to make these lines that represented the stitches. And to make it look the most like stitches, you want to put those lines roughly perpendicular to the sides of the shapes that you drew initially. And lastly, I put these little X's in the corners because I didn't really like the empty space that was there and I thought it finished it up nicely. And so here's the finished patchwork nail art. And spoiler alert, this one's gonna be the cutest one. It's time to make a little glow-in-the-dark ghosty. I started by doing 2 coats of Ivory Tower by Holo Taco in order to get it to opacity, followed by glow-in-the-dark top coat, and then glossy top coat that I've been doing before every nail art. Okay, the ghost itself does take a little bit of drawing skill, but with a little bit of practice, I think that this is doable. I started by making a curvy V shape to represent the bottom of the ghost, and then I pulled some C shapes to make the 2 little hands. And one big upside down U makes the head of the ghost. Very carefully, I added 2 dots for the eyes and 1 for the mouth. And what's really great about this method is since we drew the ghost in negative space, as I was filling in the background, I was also sharpening or tweaking any of the lines that I needed to. You do have to be careful though, because you can always take away some of the ghost, but you can't put any more back after you remove some. And here's the finished little ghosty. I love him so much, and no one else is allowed to have a different opinion than me. The skull is actually pretty much exactly the same of how I set up the ghost. The only difference was the nail art on the top, so I'm gonna skip to that. I started by making the cheekbones of the skull by making these curves that started at the cuticle and went upwards and outwards to the side of the nail. The hardest part of the cheekbones was trying to keep them symmetrical, but hey, let's just say they're cousins, not siblings. Moving on, I used a thin striping brush to make a horizontal line connecting the 2 cheekbones, and then I went back and did the Frankenstein technique again and made little vertical lines to make the rest of the teeth. The nose socket was made by 2 vertical triangles that were kind of rounded and facing back to back. And then finally, it was time to draw in the eye sockets. This also took a little bit of fixing, which I was able to do when I was filling in the eye holes. Gross. Finishing up, I have to fill in the cheekbones. You do have to really dig the polish in there, and you're gonna get it all over your cuticles, but it's nothing that a cleanup brush dipped in a little bit of acetone can't clean up. And here's the finished skull look. Still not as cute as my ghosty baby, but I'm gonna give him 9 out of 10 spookies. One moment. You done? Okay. My final step is going to be a top coat, but I'm going to do that in about an hour because I need to make sure that I let all of the black polish dry. As you can see, there's lots of layers of thick black polish, which will streak if I apply the top coat way too soon. I'm talking to my future self here, so if I actually was able to put on the top coat without blurring this, I'm going to be showing that now. Otherwise, what you're looking at are shots before the top coat, before I messed everything up and I cried myself to sleep. Anyways, only the spiderweb itself was what blurred. I was really worried about the ghost in the skull, but there's only tiny little dragging lines you can see on some of the parts of the spiderweb. And now for the part that you've all been waiting for. It's gonna glow in the dark. Now we need to talk about how amazing this is. Honestly, this spiderweb, perfect. The skull, perfect. I'm just so impressed with myself that I made an entire YouTube video about it. So final thoughts with this. I think I put this in the wrong order in terms of difficulty. I definitely think that the blood drip was the easiest one. The next level up would probably be the Frankenstein print. That was really just putting squares of color and then the little dots using the thin brush. The spider web stressed me out. Doing those lines as perfectly as possible with the thin striping brush, stressful. But then we gotta talk about the ghost. Spooky! The ghost? I had to draw a little ghost first, otherwise I didn't know what I was doing because I had to paint this upside down in order to film it. And I think it came out, but I had to stop every 2 seconds to just see if it was good. And then I got to the skull, and the skull wasn't too bad, but this was also not the, I left this open. This was also not the right time to figure out that I'm really low on black polish and I need to order some more. So, overall though, I think this is still pretty beginner-friendly nail art. You just need to get a set of nail art brushes. Make sure you get various sizes of nail art brushes, something thin for a striping brush, and something tiny for the small little detail that I used for the ghost or the skull. It took me like an hour and a half to do all of this, but I definitely think that it would have taken a lot less time if I wasn't filming, because putting myself in awkward angles to film, it just makes everything take longer. I think personally my absolute all-time favorite is the blood drip because it's super easy and I can do it on my other hand because it's dripping blood. It can be messy. Though I will say, the skull is stupid cute. It has no right being this cute. The ghost is too. I don't know why I decided to do the ghost, the most detailed figure on the smallest finger. Someone tell me never to do that again. That's all I have for today's tutorial. Let me know if you want to see any other Halloween nail art. Comment below which one was your favorite. Don't forget to like and subscribe and stay spooky. Spooky! Spooky.